Good morning, students. So this is the third video of constructors and destructors. I'll continue from where we left off. So just a recap about constructors. The constructors are the functions which are called whenever a new instance of a class is created. So what is the use of the constructor? They have one purpose, that was what? To allow you to guarantee that objects are correctly initialized. So the use of the constructor was they are invoked automatically when the objects are created, right? Okay, so a constructor, some of the characteristics of the constructors you had to know was they are always declared in the public section. So they are always invoked automatically when the objects are created. Okay, and then they do not have any return types, not even void. Okay, so there's no return type. So these are also some of the differences with the member functions. Keep in mind that constructors are special functions. Okay, they are special functions. So they are special functions which are used to initialize the data members that is defined in the class. So these constructors are member functions used to initialize the data members that belongs to the object. Okay, since functions or member functions are used to access the data members or execute or define uh, the data members. Okay, so same way constructors are also used the same purpose. Only thing is that unlike member functions, constructors, they do not have return type. Okay, they are always automatically invoked when objects are created, and since they do not have any return type, not even void is allowed. Okay, and they cannot be referred by the to the address. Okay, yes, however, they can have default arguments. So what is that? We will see in the following programs. Now, uh, we saw default arguments also yesterday. Sorry, default constructor. So I explained to you default constructor. So uh, a default constructor has no parameters. It does not take any parameters or arguments, right? So that we saw yesterday. So like a default constructor has no parameters, or if at all it has parameters. Okay, now here in this program, this is your default constructor with no parameters. It does not accept any parameters, right? Nor does it pass any arguments. But if it has parameters, then all the parameters will have default values. Okay, in this case default values would be like 0. Good. Now, so we saw this program yesterday. Okay, I explained to you this program. Okay, regarding the default regarding the default constructor. Okay, now if you like I said, if you see this program and the previous programs in the classes and object, okay, you saw that the programs are quite similar, right? The programs are quite similar. The class declaration is there, the data members with private access, public access, like that, right? And then the member functions are there, but along with that, here you have your default constructor declaration, right? Now if at all uh, in a program, okay, uh, okay, as soon as you declare an object, by the class name, the constructor gets called in, gets invoked. Okay, so the constructor gets invoked. So in this case, this is the constructor body. So this constructor body, okay, this constructor function body gets invoked, and it helps to initialize the data members, in this case the object members, right? So it initialize, so that is the only purpose, okay, to ensure that the object members gets uh, initialized properly. Okay, so in case there like I said, in case there is no default constructor defined, okay, then what will happen? Okay, once the object gets created, okay, even if a constructor is not declared, okay, the compiler will create a constructor that is the default constructor without any argument, okay, without any parameters, and execute that default constructor. Okay, so that means if this constructor body is not there, okay, however still this declaration will be invoked. Okay, so now in the today so we will continue with parameterized constructor. Okay, so parameterized constructor can pass value into the constructor. Okay, so here you can see that it can pass value into the constructor who have different parameters in the constructor function. Okay, now when we're talking about parameters constructor, okay, it touches the concept of uh, overloading. Okay, constructor overloading, which is in the following pages. Okay, and constructor overloading, function overloading, similar. Okay, you have learned in classes and object the concept of function overloading, right? The same function name is used provided the parameters types, the parameter names are different, right? When the function is being called, uh, okay, you have the same function names, but how will the compiler know which function to call, right? Depending on the parameter types and the parameter name, right? So in constructor overloading, you learn that, okay, the same function name can be used, okay, can be called, provided like the number of arguments that is passed, okay, may be different, okay, or the parameters. So here suppose like here four parameters are there, right? Okay, so for some constructors, okay, for some constructors it may use three parameters, it may pass three parameters, it may pass four parameters, it may pass five parameters, like that. Okay, so here what is parameters constructor? Okay, it it passes arguments, okay, it passes arguments. So the value will be transferred from the main function to the constructor either with direct values or through variables. Okay, so from the main function, okay, using the constructor, the values will be transferred, that is the arguments, or through variables, that is through parameters. Okay, so the parameters constructor always passes initial values or stored values as arguments into the constructor object through the constructor object. Otherwise, there will be an error at the constructor object. Okay, so initial values are passed. So what do you mean by that? Okay, now in this particular example, okay, in this particular example, here if you see okay, here you can see a changes here. Okay, now in this is your this is not your this is your parameterized constructor declaration. Okay, this is your parameterized constructor declaration. The constructor name will always be same as the class name, right? So the class name is employee, so here this is the constructor name. Okay, so how do we know? Because it's declared under the member function and always declared under the public label. Okay, so the compiler understands that this is a constructor. What type of constructor? This is a parameterized constructor. Okay, so this is a parameterized constructor. How does it know? Because under the bracket, under the parenthesis, okay, the parameters along with the return with the data type is mentioned, right? So a parameterized constructor passes parameters or arguments, right? So in this case, this is your declaration of parameterized constructor. So you can see that 1, 2, 3, 4 parameters are accepted. Okay, so this is how your parameterized constructor gets declared. Okay, now this is your parameterized constructor body. Okay, and so this is a normal member function prototype declaration. Okay, So there is a return type, but in the case of this constructor, you can see that there is no return type, not even void is written, right? In the case of this, the return type is void, okay, because simple cout statement gets executed here. It is just to display the results, right? So in the main function, you can see that here the parameterized constructor implicit call to the constructor. Okay, so this is an example of implicit call. What is implicit call? It's in the next page. Okay, so here this is the class name, this is the object, right? So using the class, you are declaring an object, or you're creating an object, right? And these are the datas of the object that must be passed. So here what you're doing is that, okay, you are passing the values of this uh, object, the arguments, okay, the arguments of the object. Okay, so when you are declaring, or when you're initializing, in this case this is initializing, this is same like emb dot emb code equals to 100, emb dot emb names equals to Miss Sujata, right? So this is you are initializing. Okay, so this is what initializing. So when you're initializing the values, okay, through the object, okay, so what happens is that this is implicit call to the constructor. Okay, so what happens is that these values get passed to the called constructor. Okay, so and that values gets transferred to this e code, e name, e designation, e salary. Okay, so like that way, what happened is that here now initialize object data members, the object data members, the real object data members gets initialized, that is assigning the values that was stored in e code to employee code, emb code. Okay, so that way the objects data member gets initialized. Like I said, the duty of the constructor is, be it a default constructor or a parameterized constructor, the purpose of the parameterized constructor in this case is to ensure proper initialization of the object members, right here. So a proper initialization of the object, in this case data members. So what you're doing, you are assigning the values. Okay, so whenever a parameterized constructor is defined, okay, and an object gets created. Okay, so in this case, right, so the object gets created. So when the object gets created, okay, in this case, since we have to pass these values, right, okay, so it gets passed here. So which holds the values, okay, it holds the values, okay, or in this case the parameters, okay, in this case the arguments, right? So what happens is that when we have to create a parameterized constructor, okay, we need to add the parameters, or in this case the arguments, okay, as a value. Okay, so to this object, and using the pass by value method, okay, that we use in normal member functions. Okay, so using the pass by value method, we pass this to the call function, or in this case the called this constructor gets called. Okay, this constructor gets called, and then the value gets initialized. Okay, so just keep in mind that when a constructor is declared in a class, okay, initialization, when a constructor is declared in a class, okay, initialization of the object becomes mandatory. Okay, so initialization of the objects becomes mandatory. So you just remember that in a default constructor it takes no arguments, okay, but if no constructor is defined, okay, then compiler supplies a default constructor. Okay, but in this case we have a parameterized constructor, okay, and the parameterized constructor body, like that. So now we move on to the next, that is there are two methods. Okay, there are two methods through which parameterized constructor can be passed, that is by implicit call and explicit call. Okay, so uh, So when you define a class, okay, it may appear that you cannot have a default constructor. Okay, it may appear that you cannot have a default constructor. Okay, because you need certain data members to be initialized at the time of the creation. Okay, but it will but if you provide a way to ensure that these data members are this data members are introduced in the later part. So like in this particular example and in the previous example, you saw that the constructors were simply declared here, right? The constructors were was not defined. The constructor body was not defined in under the class, right? So how do so what we did, we ensured that the data members were introduced, or the data members were initialized in the later part of the program, right, by using a default constructor or by using a parameterized constructor. In this case, parameterized constructor, how? Outside of the class, by using the scope resolution operator, right? And even in the default constructor also, even in the default constructor also, outside of the class, by using the scope resolution operator, right? So here the default constructor body, right? Okay, so like that. Okay, now in the case of the parameters constructor, in this particular example, same example, okay, here, yeah, so I'll not just go into these details, okay, because like this we have seen in classes and object also, regarding how we calculate the EMB salary, gross salary, HRA, DA, like that. Okay, but if you see here again, this is the implicit declaration, like I said, right? Now in this case, using the class name, okay, using the class name, okay, the object is declared, the object is created, okay, and the values of the objects are passed, okay, are passed. So using pass by value method, so these values get passed to here, the call constructor, right? So in this case, like I said, same program, okay, the parameterized constructor gets declared here. Okay, a parameterized constructor has has parameters, right, or arguments are passed by the constructor. Okay, so if this is a default constructor, if this default constructor, it will, these parentheses will not have any parameters or return type, right, or no arguments. Okay, so in this case, this is your parameterized constructor declaration. Okay, so since it is declared, okay, the parameterized the parameterized function body is defined outside of the class. Okay, so this is, you can consider as this one as your prototype declaration, and this is your function definition. Okay, so same, okay, uh, you are initializing the object, okay, and then assigning the values to data members, like that. Okay, and the rest is you're calculating the DA, you're calculating the HRA, you're calculating the gross salary, and using the member functions display, you are displaying the values. Okay, so this is how an implicit uh, uh, call is done. Okay, so I'll just go through here. Okay, see, uh, so to extract the values in the parameterized constructor, okay, so to extract the values in the parameterized constructor, you can create an object of any with the initial values, then the constructor will be called implicitly. Okay, the values are shown. So in this part, implicit call is done. Okay, implicit call is done. Since implicit call is done, okay, the object itself assigns the value, the object itself assigns the value, calls, invokes the parameterized constructor body. Okay, now in the case of in the case of explicit call, okay, so in the case of explicit call, it is quite different. Okay, so I just hope that you have understood this, how we have done this implicit call. Okay, what is the use of this implicit call? We have used this in classes and object also. Okay, so I hope that from these two programs you have understood the concept of parameterized constructor. Okay, so that will be for today. For tomorrow, we'll start for explicit calls. Okay, so if you have any doubts on this parameterized constructor, okay, yes, you can message me or you can call me. So what you will notice is that the difference between the classes and object, okay, and then this program is, okay, if you see this program, what if you see this program, what do you notice? Everything is same. Only thing is that here and here, right? Okay, this one, this is also quite similar, right? Except that here the parameterized constructor gets invoked, right? Okay, but we have seen this in objects as function argument, that is in the previous chapter also we have seen this one using the inline call method, or uh, using the object as function argument method also, right, in the previous program also. Yeah, this similar same type, but the only thing was that there this class name was not reused again. Instead of that, we had to use a member function. We use a member function, suppose like since this is display, suppose like enter data or input data, right? And in this case, instead of this employee keyword, we had suppose like another different member function name, input data, right? So in that case, in the case of objects and classes, it was always explicit call. In terms of member function, we always explicitly have to call it, right? But in the case of parameterized constructor, it can be done implicitly also, it can be done explicitly also. Okay, so implicit declaration, in case like that, right, a default constructor will be called. Okay, so just go through this program, try to understand the difference between a default constructor and a parameterized constructor. Okay, so like I said, if you have any doubts on that, you can ask. Okay, and students, submit the 3 assignments by Saturday. Okay, it does not matter how you do it. Okay, means like try as much to solve all the 3, and then whether it's correct or incorrect, okay, put on your effort and give it to me, okay, so that I'll check it, and then from there I'll understand which part you don't understand, what you don't understand. Okay, if you have any doubts in the classes and object theory part, okay, you can also message me on that also. So that will be for today. Tomorrow we'll start explicit call methods.